Going live. We're live.
We're live, fantastic.
Hi everyone, welcome to this month's Christchurch Laravel meetup. We're doing something a little bit different this month. We had a few people away, let's put it that way. So Ryan came up with the great idea of actually turning the session into something more of a podcast. So what we're going to do is just basically have a beer or two and have a chat about what's going on in the Laravel world, and maybe discuss some of the, something we don't usually do, discuss more of how to get started and tips and tricks, and basically where beginners can get started. So no pressure, Ryan, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ryan. I'm the lead developer at WebTools Agriculture. We're based in the loft on Litchfield Street in Christchurch. Been working with Laravel for 3 or 4 years now, since kind of early version 5 days. Looking forward to having a bit of a chat, but I'll let another of Josh's colleagues, Craig, introduce himself first.
Yeah, as I said, I'm Craig. I work with Josh at Custom D. We do a lot of custom development. Laravel now, 2 to 3 years. Before that we were CodeIgniter, but to move to Laravel has been great. Yeah.
Cool, nice and easy. I suppose I should probably introduce myself as well, considering this is going on live stream versus in real life. So I have a mic attached, don't I? So my name's Josh. I've worked with both Ryan and Craig. So currently working with Craig though, not Ryan. And I would probably describe myself as the jack of all trades. So I'm a senior developer, but I've worked across old CodeIgniter frameworks, done quite a bit of CMS work now. Node, React, Vue, the list just keeps going, databases, and currently interested in getting into more of the cloud space, so looking at the DevOps side of things. But anyway, let's kick into things. I think, how should we run this? It might be quite good maybe to talk a little bit about if you're a beginner starting in the Laravel ecosystem. Where's a good starting place? Like, how do you get started? Where should you go? What are some things to watch out for? How do you migrate from other frameworks? How do they do things differently? All that sort of thing. So since I'm guessing this is somewhat what your talk was about, Ryan, so maybe if you want to kick things off.
Yeah, so if you're looking to get into Laravel for the first time, I guess it kind of depends a bit about what your background is, whether you're already, it depends where you're coming from. I think if you're already a PHP developer and you're used to working with other frameworks, then you'll find Laravel a breeze to get going with. The documentation's excellent, and there are some really great tools for getting set up on a local workstation and cracking on. Whether you want to use something Docker based, the new Laravel Sail packages are really, really great for getting set up quickly. Although if you know Docker well, then you may find that you want to make some changes to that straight away, or roll your own Docker Compose file. But if you don't, then that's probably the fastest way to get going these days. But I think if you're on a Mac, there's things like Valet. So is Homestead still an ongoing concern? Can't remember.
Homestead.
Is that still a thing?
I think you introduced me to that a while ago.
Possibly.
I've never used it.
Yeah, it's been a while. But yeah, there's loads of great options, and they're all really well documented. If you're coming from other languages, then and you've maybe heard that Laravel's great, but I don't know, maybe you've not worked with PHP and have mixed feelings about possibly working with PHP, I'd say give Laravel a go. I know PHP's got a bit of a difficult reputation in some quarters, but it's making massive strides forward over the last few years, and I think some of the hairy bits that they still haven't been able to move forward so fast with, Laravel's kind of polished that, put that all behind some nice interfaces for you, and it's really, really feels great to work with, I think.
One of the things we were talking about off camera was actually how Laravel can be quite opinionated. And I guess that's actually quite good for people starting off with the framework, because it'll actually guide them on best practices, where to put things, how to do things, and that sort of thing. Is that right? It's not a framework that leaves it totally up to you, like you can do whatever you want. There are some Laravel, I think they call it the Laravel way, right?
Yeah, I'd say there's definitely some pretty strongly held opinions Laravel has that you probably, at least while you're just starting out, be well advised to stick with. Obviously it's a fairly typical MVC arrangement that you'll probably be used to from other environments if you're coming from other frameworks. But there are some things Laravel does that are a little bit unusual. One of those, the big one perhaps, is Eloquent, which is an active record based ORM, and quite different from the other leading PHP ORM doctrine, but it's heavily influenced by Ruby on Rails active record implementation. So the key difference there from some other systems, I think if you're coming from other languages like Java, you tend to see more of a repository-based layer, but you tend to have access to your database via Eloquent in a lot more places in your application than you maybe might expect, but I'd say that's kind of expected for a Laravel app. Laravel's also got static implementations of a lot of its services that it calls facades, which I think may look a little bit unusual to some people, but again, I think actually if you kind of use them for a bit and see how they go for you, you might find that you quite like them. But that's those. So yeah, there definitely is like something distinctive about Laravel, isn't there? That I'll be interested to see if you guys have any feelings about that as well. But I think there is something quite distinctive about it, and if you kind of lean into that, you can get some really good results. There are cases where you maybe want to do something different, but I think if you're just starting out with Laravel, you won't go too far wrong if you kind of follow the examples in the docs and maybe think, if it's something you're trying to do something that's not explicitly defined in the docs, kind of like, oh, well, what would it look like if it looked like that? But yeah, I don't know what you guys feel about kind of Laravel style, whether you think there's something to it or...
I'm sure Craig has many thoughts and opinions on this.
I pretty much could mirror most of that. I mean, Eloquent itself is brilliant once you get used to it. Those who don't like it can fall back to the standard builder or the capsule system. It's not very well documented on the Laravel side, but there is a whole big section on using capsules for your database. So again, that's where, as much as it's opinionated, you can just diverge and do what you want. Facades in that, to me, especially when you're using a decent editor, are a lifesaver in times of time. And you get your facades that are documented correctly, you've got auto-completing PHP Storm or VS Code, and suddenly you don't have to remember half of what everything does, it's autocomplete. So if you stick to the Laravel way using those things, it saves time. I think that's the biggest thing with Laravel for me, is it's rapid. Once you get used to it, it's just really fast to do stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely the least experienced Laravel developer in this room out of the three of us. But one thing that really struck me was how fluent the framework is. So coming from other frameworks, I found that there's a lot of methods that you can chain, and as you start building out your whatever it might be, your app or your software or your website, things read very naturally. You're going through it, and it's you say, right, I'm getting this, and now I'm doing this to it, and now I'm applying this, and it actually makes it quite so. When I first started back working with you again, Craig, I hadn't had too much exposure to Laravel, so diving into some of those projects where you guys have been, doing your fancy bits and pieces, I was actually able to go in and actually understand it quite quickly because it was very fluent and it was easy to understand, and that's something that really struck me as like a newcomer to the framework.
Yeah. I think that's where the opinionation comes in brilliantly, and then the flexibility. I mean, we were discussing offsite between domain models, and with us we've adopted an action pattern which Spatey uses quite a bit as well, where everything just sits in an actions folder and each action does one thing and one thing only, and that has just actually made a world of difference to what we're doing. It's easily testable, easily plugged in, and as Josh says, when he came in and looked at it, he could just literally, by the naming convention, read exactly what it was doing. So yeah.
So an actions pattern, just to revisit that. So that's something you would recommend newcomers to have a look at in the doc. Now, you did show me an article that kind of explained this.
Yes, Spatey has got it on his website.
Yeah.
He's got a package that actually turns into queues as well.
And this is something that's not Laravel specific, right? You can do that in any framework.
Scarily enough, Laravel seems to have adopted it in some of the add-ons that Taylor maintains.
Yeah.
So this is Laravel Jetstream uses it. All of the registration processes sit in an action folder, and each action deals with one piece of it. It's heading towards the really lean controller structure, where you just tell the controller to call that action and return it, which means, again, if you use a login or a registration process, register, hits a register controller, calls the action. Now you need another registration endpoint from the console. For instance, you want to manually add users via the console. A console command calls the exact same action. 2 lines of code in each area, then you're done.
Okay, so as a newcomer, you'd recommend researching and implementing actions pattern because it should save you a bit of pain later on as your app grows in size and complexity.
Honest opinion, yeah. You can write an action, does its one thing, write a test for it, test it properly, and it's out of the way. Obviously, you're not going to go and write an action for something really complicated, like a full-on API communication with another API service. But yeah, simple process. User's going to register a user registration action, and you can call it in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I am not actually a huge fan of them personally, because I find that in the majority of cases, you probably don't want multiple entry points into your application, and therefore all you end up doing with an action is just moving the code that could have been in your controller somewhere else to little benefit. You can unit test an action if you want, but I tend to find that, I mean, it depends how many actions you're doing in your controller, but I sort of tend to think if you're doing something too complex that you maybe want either a separate endpoint to handle whatever it is you're trying to do in your API structure, or you might want to pass some of that work off to an event. So I'm not a massive fan of actions, as I wasn't a massive fan of service classes either, when that was what people used to call actions. I kind of think that they tend to be where people put code that they don't know where they should put the code.
We need somewhere to put this.
Let's call it a service or an action, yeah. My feeling is that people sometimes... so there's a few things. One thing I find is that I like to put... so form requests I find super useful. So like in Taylor's, the Fortify package Craig was talking about, well, Jetstream, but he uses Fortify, and that uses actions. He does stuff like puts the validation and things in actions, which could have gone in form request classes. And then, yeah, like I've been saying, sometimes you might want an event to trigger the next thing, but I suppose it's quite nice. Events do often introduce a certain amount of indirection, which with an action, it's all there in front of you, and you can see it in one place. But yeah, I mean, I don't feel strongly against them, but I sometimes feel people tend to introduce them before they really need them, I guess, is always the tendency.
So potentially overuse them.
Yeah.
Use them in the wrong way.
Maybe, yeah. I think it's important to be quite... I mean, I think one of the great things about Laravel we've been talking about is fluency, and I think you can do so much with so little code that really you can... I tend to find if I need more than 3 lines in a controller method to do something, then I'm probably trying to do too much with that controller, and therefore, you know, if I've got more than that, and I think I could either move it to an action to kind of encapsulate that, or maybe I need to look at either I've got something wrong in my domain model, or I need to be using something else that Laravel offers out of the box, maybe without reaching for my own abstraction of an action. But you know, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly legitimate pattern. But I have mixed. I guess I'm not an unreserved. I wouldn't necessarily encourage someone who's new to the framework to start using them straight away, but it won't hurt you if you choose to.
Yeah, or at least to know about them.
It's good to know about them for sure. Yeah.
So I guess being a Laravel meetup, we don't often talk about the bad side of Laravel. We tend to talk about the good things. So if I was coming to this framework afresh, which I pretty much am in some respects, what are the things that you need to watch out for, or it could be doing better?
Something that I find unusual about the Laravel framework and community is there's a tendency to write only feature tests, and that is okay up to a point, but after a while, depending on how you set your tests up, you end up with feature tests, or especially like API tests as well, if you're writing an API, where you try and cover things like different validation cases by sending requests to an API endpoint. And that is a hard way of doing it.
I think we came across something
I've
similar
got a good
today.
story on that one.
Do you want to go for it? I'm interested to see what you've got to say on this.
It's quite funny. We literally had this today.
One of the projects we did, we thought, hey, let's test, and let's test properly. So, every validation, every request validates, positive, negative, testing the rules. The unit tests take over half an hour to run now.
Oh. And is that because they're actually sending an API?
Oh, it's using the request methodology
Right.
inside, and it's going up and down, and it just became, an automated pipeline, pushing a small merge. And I know Josh swore at me that day when he had to wait half an hour.
I never swear at you, Craig.
It literally, it became a nightmare.
In public? No.
Again, I agree. Too many features, not enough units. And over-testing. If I had to rewrite those tests now, the way I do them now is literally I've got a rule that makes sure that form request exists, that the rules match. I don't see a reason to test the rules, because the rules are tested elsewhere in any event. So, you got your form, you know what you want. Make sure that the rules are set correctly, your test should pass, and that it's attached to your controller.
The key bit there is making sure your rules are set correctly. I don't know if it's good if you... So I've been working with Laravel for years, and I still regularly get the rule validation rules wrong, especially when you're dealing with things like nullable fields, or arrays. Arrays are hard. So a pattern I really like is for validation rule. I don't tend to test. So I've got a rule that says a string's a string, but for slightly more complicated ones where there's maybe like a conditional rule or something a bit more complex, I tend to do a unit test of the form request class and use a PHP unit data provider to just generate some test cases that I'm interested in, maybe 4 or 5 if there's anything complex, and then instantiate a new form request object and instantiate a validator with the rules I've got out of it, and test that gives me the expected response I want. So those run in obviously milliseconds because you don't have to bootstrap the framework. I do like to have a bit of testing and validation, especially when I'm working in a team, because I might understand how the rules work well, but I think they're something that take a while to get used to if you've got people on your team who've not spent as long working with them. And I think there are other areas as well where, and like again, Eloquent itself is immaculately tested, but it's very easy to have a query that's not doing what you think it should be, and maybe especially for like an index endpoint on a controller, you've maybe got an API test that tests that it returns the right JSON structure, but for like if you've got a few filters in there, you probably don't want to test those all with requests. So I like to unit test scopes sometimes with the database, just to check you've got those right. If they're complex, have a few where clauses in, because they're very easy to get wrong, and I find those tests can be pretty valuable, especially again when you're working in quite a few developers on a project. I think when
a year goes by and you change some stuff, and then you start breaking things without realizing.
Yeah, so that's one thing I think. It's not about Laravel. Laravel, you can test it however you want, but I think as a community, that's something that people could look at. And again, it's not such a big deal. Small projects, your own, if it's just personal projects, then you don't need that level of test coverage. But if you're working on something a bit bigger, because the other problem when you get a bit bigger is, like Craig's saying, performance starts becoming an issue. If you've got a test suite of a few hundred tests, then you really start needing to be able to pass most of the hard work into unit tests, because they run the magnitude faster. Trying to think, you got anything else that's maybe not so good? It's pretty hard to find, it's pretty hard to beat.
This could be why it's the #1 framework in the PHP space.
Yeah, the argument I got argument I got is statemic.
Well,
That's cheating.
yeah. I mean,
I have got one actually.
Yeah. No, but all honesty,
yeah. We shouldn't really touch on that, but it's not Satamic's fault entirely.
no. All honesty, yeah. Eloquent itself, brilliant. The ability to just bypass Eloquent in terms of internal projects, I'd like a way to actually lock it down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you make use of Eloquent for argument's sake and you're using events and observers, brilliant. It all does its job. It takes one developer to decide to go DB table this, and all your hard work is gone. So it'd be nice to be able to say, you know what, you're not allowed to use that builder, you have to use Eloquent. I've seen it happen a couple of times in projects now where people are trying to bypass events or do something and they just go DB table and it breaks things.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about events. That is one of my slight gripes, that there's like 4 or 5 different ways to do events. And consequently, if there's something weird going on with one of them or there's something unexpected happen, as I was saying earlier, events can introduce quite a lot of indirection into your system. And because there are 4 or 5 different ways of doing events in Laravel, you've got the model events, and you can either listen for the model events with a custom event or do it statically in a callback from the model. Then you've got observers. Then you've got your own custom events. And because there's no one way of doing it, sometimes there's a side effect going on in your system, and you can't easily see where it's come from because you've got to check for all these different things. And again, like after you've used it for a while, you start thinking, oh, I know what could have happened here. But if you don't know it well, that can really floor you for a few hours.
Tearing your hair out.
Yeah. That's the only one that regularly irritates me, I would say.
Okay.
Otherwise pretty...
So we've got the community pushing too many feature tests, and then events which can lead to unwieldy systems if you're not careful.
I really, especially like the observers. Like once you've got the model events, do you need observers on top? I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, maybe you do.
or a bootable trait.
Yeah, well, exactly. There's so many ways you could go. I almost wish that there was just one way, so that people knew what, if there's some kind of indirection going on, at least they know where to look for what the source of it could be. But yeah, I don't know. It's nice to have that flexibility too, I guess, for some people. And I think there are things that probably for library authors, like some of the model events are great because you can hook into those. Whereas obviously if there's only custom events available, that's not so useful.
And then, say if I was looking to build a brand new piece of software and I was going to use the PHP language, but I didn't know which framework to use. I had the choice in any of them. Why would I go with Laravel? What are its main selling points?
I think like versatility and speed of development. Craig's absolutely right. Like that's the biggest thing. There are a couple of reasons I wouldn't use Laravel, and literally for everything else I would. One is I wouldn't try and do a GraphQL API with it. I don't rate using a language that doesn't really understand the difference between arrays and hash maps for GraphQL, and also weakly iffy type system is a non-starter. Support for GraphQL is so much better in other languages, especially TypeScript. And then, I think, if you're doing a genuine microservice, then that's overkill. But I wouldn't try that until you're a really big organization. You absolutely have to.
Yep.
And then, again, like maybe something at the other end of the scale that was really big, you might find that you want the real freedom of Symfony or something like that. But for everything in between, I think Laravel's just the speed of development is going to give you is pretty hard to beat. And even if you want something bigger than you can do with Laravel, like does that really want to be one application? I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Yeah.
You got any thoughts on that? What would you? Sorry, I've turned the question on its head really. But I'm it could do it. Yeah. So.
Good general purpose.
If you only need one API endpoint, Laravel's murder. If you need the flexibility of queues and that,
Do they still have Lumen, is it?
Lumen still exists. It's pretty much, it's just a,
It was a very lightweight version,
yeah,
wasn't it?
it's really an empty version of Laravel with next to nothing on. It's for those where you know you're not going to have any front end and it's just going to be an API. You should be using Lumen, but we all tend to fall back to Laravel because of the add-ons for the queuing and all of that. So,
Yeah.
but I mean, again, it boils down to microservices. I don't want to run a CMS in Laravel. Not when you've got something like Craft out there which does its job properly.
I never thought I would hear Craig say those words.
I hated Craft when it came out.
You've hated Craft since I've known you.
But yeah, Statamic's got its way. It can probably get there once they figure out how to actually make it work multi-platform. Multi-platform across a load balancer.
Yeah.
It is useless on a load balancer. That's where Craft succeeds. And yeah, I mean, the last plugin I did for Craft, I actually used Laravel. So
I think, yeah, I suppose a CMS project, but I haven't come across those lately. But actually, the last, as I say, we've got a project that's got CMS involved in a minute, and actually, I'm just using Laravel as a proxy to headless CMS, caching a lot of it in the headless CMS and passing a lot of that content through to inertia. And I probably would much rather do that than get a CMS involved because they're all horrible to work with. All right, the performance isn't fantastic, but it's more than good enough.
So,
Once you start caching all the content, there's not a lot of dynamic content in there. So if it's all cached in Redis, I can tell you it's a damn sight faster than most CMSs.
yeah, for sure. So Ryan, your talk today was keeping Laravel stupidly simple.
Yep.
Do you want to maybe give us like a very high level summary of some of the main kind of points from the talk?
Yeah, we've covered quite a few of them already.
Okay.
I mean, Laravel speaks so well to simplicity that if you kind of, I guess what I was mainly talking about was that I had a tendency, I guess earlier in my career, done a lot of my learning about software development in general has been quite sort of self-guided, I guess, choose your own adventure, and you get some pretty confident advice on the internet about things you should be doing when you're programming on topics like I was talking about some of the books I read, like Clean Code and Domain Driven Design, and people read these and start saying, well, this is the way that things must be done, and I think I was just highlighting in the talk that those a lot of those patterns in those books were written aimed at people who are working in code bases with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of lines of code and huge teams of developers, and that's not really where, I mean, you could do Laravel that way, but I think if you're somebody that's earlier on in their development path, you'd probably be better served to Laravel does have some opinions that are slightly different to that, and that you might be well served if you are going to work with Laravel to kind of lean into the framework a bit and let that guide you rather than trying to impose these patterns on it.
I think that's actually really solid advice, because I do remember when I first started off programming, trying to research some of those patterns that you were talking about, domain-driven design, that sort of thing. And I remember at the time just thinking to myself, how do I apply this to the simple website that I'm building? This is telling me how I should be doing things, but how do I make that fit into this simple thing that only I'm working on, or I've got one other person working on? So I think that's really good advice, actually. Follow the framework's guidelines and their ways of doing things, and you'll probably have a much easier time when you're starting off, and wait until you're at that level until.
Yeah, I think so. I was, I started doing things like trying to inject everything as a dependency and creating like factories everywhere to create API resources and that sort of mad stuff. And it's like suddenly you need to write like 15 lines of code to do something that's a one-line static function, user resource make, pass a user in, done. And it's just it's like it's not gonna kill you, it's not gonna hurt you, but it's just a load of stuff you don't need to do, and it's not a lot of fun.
And I think that's something that everyone has to discover for themselves on the journey from starting off as a beginner, going, to intermediate and then to senior. So I kind of think of like when you're a beginner, you start off at this point and you're just trying to figure out how to do stuff. You just want stuff to work. And then as you progress, you go over to here as an intermediate and you're researching all the hard stuff. And like you're saying, you're doing everything you can, the most complicated ways and all the rest of it because you know all the stuff now.
Yeah.
And then as a senior, you actually sort of come back to the middle somewhere where
you try.
well, no, like when to do those things
Yeah.
and when you can keep it simple. You don't need, you've got good judgment on what to do there.
I think the key point. So it's a bit of a spoiler in case I ever get this talk again. It's just still in the can, but I think I'd always lean towards doing the simplest thing you think might work, and adding complexity as you need to, rather than jumping straight to the big design pattern or the big abstraction. When you ain't gonna need it 9 times out of 10.
And there's nothing worse than spending all that time, using all that budget, doing all of that stuff, and then the client goes, actually, we don't want it to work like that anymore.
Yeah.
And you have to throw it all away or parts of it.
Yeah, so that's kind of what it was about. I don't think it was anything too earth-shattering, but I think it was kind of the talk I would have been nice if somebody had given me sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's what this group's all about, really, isn't it? It's kind of relaying our knowledge to other people, so that if you are starting out, or even if you're a senior, you get to you hear different bits of wisdom and you can take it on board, and hopefully that makes you a better developer.
I've certainly learned some really interesting stuff. It's really interesting some of Sam's presentations about encryption and that sort of thing. That's kind of stuff I haven't really got too far into. Yeah, and
This morning.
It's been nice to be part of that. It's good to have some stuff going on in Christchurch, where I think it was interesting for me coming from the UK a couple of years ago. I don't think there are certainly not a huge number of the same density of companies using Laravel here as there are in the UK, I think. It seems to be a couple years behind maybe, whereas Laravel had sort of been the de facto PHP framework in the UK since about probably 2017, 2018. It seems like not too widely used here yet.
There's still quite a few companies in New Zealand using frameworks like Silverstripe. And because Silverstripe is a New Zealand company, isn't it? Yeah. So that's probably why. But I think you're right. I think we're a little bit behind, but I think that's starting to change. Like, people are starting to adopt it now. But yeah, I have noticed across quite a few different companies in New Zealand now that we're still using other things, and maybe in the next couple of years those different frameworks will reach the end of life and they'll start switching. But who knows?
Nice. Hoping it stays put.
What's the next one going to be?
Yeah, $1 million question.
Well, and like 5 years ago, CodeIgniter was one of the biggest.
Well, that's right. I mean, 5 years ago we were using CodeIgniter 2, and at the time it was the best thing out there. It was lightweight, it was flexible, it didn't really get in your way, and we kind of, as a company at the time, we decided to adopt it fully and do all of our projects using it. Fast forward 5 years and it's pretty much dead. Like, it got revived and it still exists in some capacity, but frameworks like Laravel have far surpassed what it can do.
I think we learned one lesson there, which I specifically do. I don't write the code the Laravel way for my packages. I write my packages agnostic, and then I just plug in a service provider so that Laravel works. So if we decide to drop Laravel in 5 years and go for the next big one, theoretically all I have to do is implement their provider and get it working. So that's one tip I would probably push onto anybody is do not, if you're writing a library for something like a service or something big, not a 5-liner, but like I'm into doing an integration with Experian, for argument's sake. I've written it as a package, it's standalone. And then I've got a service provider and a facade to make it interact with Laravel. And that's probably the best thing to do.
Yeah, even the word find project that we've been working on. So we've been creating this little app, which is like a word find app, and Craig built the API service behind it. And you built the algorithm that generates the random words as a package, right?
Yeah.
And I said to Craig, like, why have you done that? Like, we're probably never ever going to use this again. But you said because I can, if we ever do, it's there now as a package and we can just plug it in and it's done.
I also like doing them as packages because then it's one piece of code you're doing. You've got to fix one thing, you fix one thing only. You don't have to worry about the whole framework.
Yeah, that's right.
That is.
Is that in here? Or is that,
No,
is that feedback?
No, I think it's out there. Sorry, there's just some strange noise occurring outside the room.
Yeah, sorry, I've lost my flow slightly. We were talking about packages, weren't we? Yeah, we'd really like to. I must admit, when you talk about abstracting, keeping your package code agnostic of Laravel, I must admit that is one thing that's difficult to do. If you do want to do that route, I probably wouldn't. I see a lot of people recommending that you keep all your business logic, so to speak, outside of, in air quotes, outside of Laravel. But I think if you do that, you're probably cutting yourself off from a lot of the advantage that Laravel can give you, I guess, because you're going to end up building out your own abstractions that Laravel could already do for you in terms of validation rules and eloquent relationships and that kind of thing. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know what your guys' take on that is. I feel like I've probably not worked on too many projects that have gone on long enough where you think, oh, actually, I want to re-platform onto something else now. And I think Laravel's so healthy at the minute that it's likely to be a few years before anyone has to do that. But you do, people have gone through sort of coding Naya to Laravel or Yi to Laravel re-platforms. And I don't know if it would be easier to move from something like Symfony, which very naturally encourages you to keep your business logic well encapsulated from the framework compared to Laravel. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what your thoughts are.
I can see Craig twitching when you said that, so I'd like to hear your response.
You've seen what I've been through with 3 projects now trying to move them. I would definitely try at least have a tier of abstraction. As I say, I mean, your core business logic should be injectable. So, yes, I'm not going to say don't use the Laravel bits, but make them, that's where facades actually make it nice and easy because you can inject them. But inject the stuff so that if, for argument's sake, Laravel drops supports for collections, which I know won't happen, but in this discussion, they decide they're no longer going to do collections and you've got everything reliant on collections. Theoretically, you just plug in a different collection library and inject it into your business logic. 5 minutes of work, instead of going through and rewriting everywhere where you've used it.
Nothing ever takes 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, nothing ever takes me 5 minutes. But the concept is, I mean, I'd rather be able to swap out one package for another where I'm using all of the functionality, but I don't want to have to go dig through the code and change every piece I've used of it. I want to just say, well, I'm using this package, do it. That way, I'm moving from Laravel to Symfony.
I can see
quick and easy.
I can see both of your points. Like, at some point you have to draw the line and say, right, I'm using this framework, I need to adopt the way it does things. But I also see what you're saying, and you're almost, you're future-proofing it. You're saying, if this ever gets dropped, then we're going to be okay because, we can use something else and we carry on.
Yeah, I just don't want to go through coding Nata to Laravel again. That is the big one.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say about collections because something I really like to do. So one of the ways that I like to not have actions or services so much is I'll do things like extend the query builder and extend collections, and you can it's not documented, but you can override the new collection, new eloquent builder methods on Laravel models and replace them with your own versions that extend the query builder and collections, and then I use those to build try and build a domain language, a fluent domain language that kind of represents business concepts in the eloquent model. So once I've done that, it's going to be a hell of a job to try and I'm well committed. I'm bought into the framework, and like I was saying, if I really did think that, hey, this project is going to be around for a decade or more, then I might consider, like Craig suggests, not tying myself too tightly to the Laravel collections. I might wrap that, inject a base collection or something and call through to it or something like that. But, that's going to, I know Craig says, it's 5 minutes to switch that out, but actually that time adds up if you're trying to do that in a few places in your app. And I think kind of certainly for a lot of the projects we work on, budget's tight. It's always tight. Doesn't matter who you work for. It's tight, or what project you're on. And that time to market is crucial. And I think Laravel's just can give you that speed if you lean into it. But it's trade-offs all the way down. There's no right or wrong analysis of these things, and that is like Josh says, where that experience comes in, that you kind of go one way or the other, and there's it's finding the right middle ground for your project, really. But as with everything.
Cool. Okay, should we wrap it up there? Have you guys got any closing thoughts or comments, or?
No, it's been really fun.
Yeah. I should have brought more beers. I've drunk my beer.
Yeah.
And all the pizzas over there as well.
Let's go down for another one. But hope if anyone's listening, they've enjoyed it, and thanks for having us, Josh.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back again next month, and I believe our colleague Tim Ackroyd is going to be doing the next talk. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you very much, Tim. See ya.
See you guys.
Cheers.
Very good.
I like doing that as well with collections, extending them.